in Unit 3 up till now we have discussed the process of advertising, and in this particular process up till now we have discussed the first three steps, and now we were basically discussing the media decision. I hope you remember the discussion that we had in our last session, and I also hope that you remember the difference between reach and frequency and impact. So the difference between reach, frequency and impact is clear to you. Now we are basically going to talk about the different media types that are there, and we have already had a chat about the various decision considerations whenever you are making a decision regarding which particular type of media to be used, or if you are using more than one type of media, which all media types to be used. So we have discussed this aspect. So now we are going to basically do a comparison between different media types that are available to us. So let us start. Now if you look at this table here, you would find that in the first column we are discussing the media type, and therein we will be discussing the advantages and the limitations of that particular media type. This is fine. Now if you look at the first media type, the print media, and within the print media we've got newspapers. So we have basically done what? We have basically categorized the print media into two: newspapers and magazines, right? Then we have got the broadcast media. Again, in broadcast media we have got television and we've also got radio. So that is again another media type that we are going to discuss. And then telephones or mobiles, which have specifically mobiles which have emerged recently as a major media type. And then we'll also be talking about the emails, again, which are a more recent phenomenon. And then we'd be talking about the earlier versions of emails, the snail mails, right? So I had given you a brief description of all these media types in the last session that we had. Now let us do a quick comparison of different media types, of these different media types. So as far as the newspaper, which is part of the print media, is concerned, now what is the advantage? Number one, there is a lot of flexibility, which means you can buy ad space anywhere. You can buy your ad space on the very first page. Nowadays this is a trend that can be easily observed. The very first page of the newspaper you see the ad, and it is a full page ad. Again, if you want to have a smaller ad, you don't want to spend that much money, you can have a 1/4 of the page you can occupy for your ad. You can actually buy for your ad. So that is almost equal to an A4 size of sheet. So that kind of flexibility is there. You can put in your ad anywhere and of any size you can use. Now timeliness. Now what do we mean by timeliness? Now this is again one important aspect. Lead time is just 1 day. What do you mean by lead time? I hope you remember your discussion in production management, wherein we probably for the first time talked about lead time. Now lead time here is the difference, the time gap between the point when you decide that you need to start an ad campaign, you need to show an ad to your audience, and the time when that ad actually gets audience exposure, when that ad actually is seen by the audience. So that is the lead time. Now what do we mean by lead time being just 1 day? What does this mean? This means that supposing today I believe, let's say I want to advertise my brand. I decide today that I want to advertise my brand, and I want people to know about it as fast as possible. So what I can do is I can go to the newspaper office today, and by 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. I can buy an ad space in the newspaper that is getting published tomorrow. And then tomorrow, along with the newspaper, my audience would also be exposed to my ad. So within 1 day I can move from deciding where to place my ad, to actually placing my ad there, and to actually getting the target audience to see that ad. So that is just one day. Compare it with television. So I have told you in the last session also, in television many a times you have to book the ad space weeks in advance, if not months in advance. So that is not the case with newspapers, and that is why we are talking about timeliness here. You just need a lead time of one day. Then we've got another advantage, which is the local market coverage. Many newspapers, they are basically selling only in a few parts of the country. They are not selling across the country. For example, if you talk about the Hindi newspapers, we talk about Dainik Jagran, Dainik Bhaskar, Sahara. These are basically Hindi newspapers. They only get sold in northern part of the country, that too in few states. Again, there are smaller newspapers which are only published locally and sold locally also. Here in Pithoragarh also we have got these kind of newspapers. They only get sold in the city. They only get sold in the district. They don't get sold in any other district. So they are only meant for the local population. So in that sense, I can also cover a particular market. If I am not interested in showing my ad across the country, let's say if I am launching my brand of namkeens only in the Kumaon region of Uttarakhand, then I have this scope, this particular option, that I can advertise my product in the local newspapers which are only getting sold in these 3 or 4 districts of Kumaon region. Is this fine? So this is what we mean by local market coverage. Now what are the limitations? First thing, the life is short. The ad is only going to be there, and the ad is only going to be seen by the audience on a particular day. You don't read the newspaper twice, and you don't read day before yesterday's paper today. You only read today's paper today. So in that sense, the exposure is going to be very fleeting. In only that one particular day when your ad is getting shown, the audience would be getting exposed to it. In that sense, the life is very short. Again, poor reproduction quality. What do we mean by this? Many a times the paper that is being used by newspapers, is not of a very good quality. It is not a very glossy paper. It's a very rough kind of a paper, and that is why the quality of the illustration may suffer. The quality of the visuals in your advertisement may suffer. So that is what we mean by poor reproduction or print quality. And small pass along audience. What do we mean by pass along audience? Please understand. Pass along means, for example, let's compare it with magazine, right? And we have seen in the magazine here, please have a look here, we are saying good pass along audience. What do we mean by this? This means that let's say if I have purchased my newspaper today, there are very less chances that I would be sharing this newspaper with my friends. Even if I'm sharing, I would be sharing it with a limited number of friends. In any case, if the newspaper is today's newspaper, tomorrow it will lose its relevance. So nobody is going to read this particular newspaper tomorrow. So within this one day, I have to share it with my friends in case I decide to share. Otherwise, I won't even share it, right? So that is what is meant by pass along audience. So have a look at this particular formula here. Exposure is more than circulation. Now what do we mean by this? I have purchased the ad. I have purchased the newspaper. So in terms of subscriber, I am just one subscriber. But if my family members are reading the newspapers, they are also getting exposed to the ad. And let's say there are 5 members in my family. So exposure is 5 while circulation is just 1. I am just one subscriber, but my whole family is getting exposed. On the other hand, let's say if I am also sharing it with my 2 friends, then the exposure for the ad would be 7. 5 of my family members have seen this ad, while 2 of my friends would also be seeing this ad, though the circulation is just 1. I am the one who is purchasing the newspaper and sharing it with my family members and my friends. So that is circulation. Circulation is just 1. There is just one person who is buying the newspaper, and the marketer would be paying the newspaper based on circulation and not exposure. So they would be actually paying the newspaper based on what is their subscriber base, how many people are buying the newspapers. So for the marketer, there is just one person who has bought the newspaper, that is me, but the actual exposure is 7 because 5 of my family members plus two of my friends have actually read this newspaper, and naturally they must have got exposed to the ad. So that is the difference between exposure and circulation. And if you look at what happens in the case of a magazine, the pass along audience is much more than in the case of newspaper. Why? For example, if I have bought a magazine, let's say I have bought India Today, so not only my family members, and not only my family members, but other of my friends may also get exposed to it. For example, and the reason is that this magazine is going to be relevant for at least 14 days, because India Today gets published only fortnightly, every 14 days. So for the next 14 days it is going to be relevant. So there are greater chances of me sharing this magazine with many more number of people. So pass along audience is going to be more in case of magazines. This is fine. However, there are some exceptions. I'll give you an example of an exception. Suppose the newspaper is there in the district library. Have you seen the district library in Pithoragarh? So suppose the newspaper has been subscribed by district library. For the marketer, this is just one subscriber, the district library of Pithoragarh. However, the exposure is much more, because there are so many people who are visiting the district library. They would be going through the newspaper and they would be getting exposed. For the marketer as well as for the newspaper, this is just one member, one individual or one organization who has bought the newspaper. So circulation wise it is just one, while the exposure is much more, because there are so many people who are visiting the library just to read the newspaper or the magazines which are there. Fine. So exposure in that case would be much more than circulation. So that is an exception for this particular thing. The newspaper, if it is there in the library, there also the pass along audience can be large, right? Now let us talk about the advantages of magazines. You see this particular magazine here, Greh Shobha. Now please also understand one more thing. We have already discussed this aspect, that the pass along audience is good enough if you compare it with newspaper. So we are not going to discuss this point again. Have a look at this thing, long life. I have discussed this. If a magazine is a fortnightly magazine, I talked about India Today, so 14 days it would remain relevant, while the newspaper remained relevant only for one day. If it is a monthly magazine, then it is going to be relevant for one whole month. There are magazines which are published every 3 months, so that is going to remain relevant for the next 3 months, right? So they have got a longer life than just newspapers. Again, the magazines generally use better quality better quality paper, and that is why the print quality is much better, reproduction quality is much better, and there is high geographic and demographic selectivity. What do we mean by this? Okay, there's a magazine called Cricket Today. Who do you think would want to read this particular magazine? Who would want to buy this particular magazine? Don't you think these are people who are actually interested in cricket? Why would others buy this kind of magazine? In case of India Today, there are people who are interested in political affairs, who are interested in current news. In case of Pratyogita Darpan, there are people who are actually preparing for some exams. So this gives me a lot of selectivity. The scope of giving my ad only in those magazines which are being read by my target audience. So for example, if I am a seller of cricket kit, bat and ball and pads and all that stuff, if I am a marketer of these kind of cricket accessories, then don't you think I would want to put my ad in Cricket Today rather than putting it in India Today? On the other hand, if I am a coaching institute, which one do you think is going to be a better option for me? India Today, Pratyogita Darpan, or Cricket Today? You understand that India Today is not going to be a good option. The best option is going to be Pratyogita Darpan, because they are more likely, people who are preparing for various exams, they are more likely to be reading Pratyogita Darpan, and naturally they would get exposed to my ad, and that would be relevant ad for them also, because they are also looking for this kind of guidance so that they can prepare well. So this kind of selectivity comes in with magazine. Again, what do we mean by geographic selectivity? Geographic selectivity means some magazines are only getting sold in few parts of the country. So in that sense, if you are catering to only those parts of the country, you are selling your product only in those parts of the country, then naturally you have got this particular magazine wherein you can place your ad, and this would give you a lot of geographic selectivity, right? Again, there are certain certain magazines which are read only by people in a particular age group. For example, there is a particular magazine which is known as Kalyan, and this is generally a magazine which talks about religious affairs and philosophy, and this is generally read by people who tend to be above 60, 65. They are more interested in these kind of activities. So let's say if I am up with a product for this aged people, then probably inserting my ad in the Kalyan is going to be a good idea. So in that sense, I am getting a lot of geographic and demographic selectivity when I am making use of magazine, which is print media, for my advertising campaign. Now let's have a look at the limitations. Long lead time, naturally. So for example, if a particular magazine gets published on every 15th of a month, and let's say the last edition got published on 15th and today let's say is 17th, if you want to publish your ad in this particular magazine, the ad would not appear before the next 15th, right? And secondly, you will have to book your ad space much in advance. You cannot go to the magazine on 13th and ask them for the ad space and buy the ad space in the magazine, because by that time, since the magazine is going to get published on 15th, the ad space would already have been sold. So that is one limitation that is there with the magazine. Again, some waste circulation. What do we mean by some waste circulation? Waste circulation is when the magazine is getting sold but it is not actually being read by the audience. So many a times in many of the libraries you see a lot of magazines, but some of the magazines nobody reads. So that is an example of waste circulation. Why is this a problem for the marketer? Because marketer does not know which of the magazine is basically part of the waste circulation, which of the magazine is getting sold but it is not getting read, right? So the market is not concerned whether the magazine is getting sold or not. The market is concerned whether the people who are buying this particular magazine, they are reading it or not. However, the marketer will have to pay based on the number of magazines sold. So if a particular magazine is selling in lakhs and lakhs, naturally they would be charging more. On the other hand, if a particular magazine sells only in hundreds or maybe a few hundreds, then they are naturally not going to charge a lot from the marketer. However, if a particular magazine gets sold in huge quantities but many of these subscribers, they don't read the magazine, then it is going to be a waste circulation, and that is of no use to the marketer. So he would be paying basically for the large number of copies that are getting sold, but he does not realize that many of these copies are not being seen, not being read by the audience, which means the audience is not actually getting exposed to his advertising campaign. So that is again a limitation. Now let's talk about television and radio as the broadcast media. Now television, you can understand that television, there is an amplified impact. This is a strength of television. Amplified impact means you can make use of light, sound, movement or motion. You can make use of different appeals. You can make use of different creative techniques just to ensure that the audience attends to your advertising campaign. So that is what we mean by amplified impact. Naturally, if something is appealing to more than 2 or 3 senses, you are seeing this particular program on TV also, you are listening to the voice also, so naturally it is going to have more impact on the audience, and that is what we mean by amplified impact. Then again, since the impact is amplified because of use of so many things, light and sound and motion, so the audience would be paying much more attention to the ads which are shown on a television. And if you compare it with ads which are shown on a newspaper, you would find that the audience pays much more attention on these ads which are shown on television. Then again, television, you know that the reach is very high, which means that it reaches a large proportion of population and across geographies. So it reaches so many people across the country. So in case you are selling a national brand, a brand which is getting sold nationally throughout the country, probably a television is going to be a better media type for you to opt for. right? On the other hand, what are the limitations? Let's have a look at the limitations. The costs are very very high. You know that buying an ad space on television is going to cost you a lot. Then there is a lot of advertising clutter, which means there are a lot of advertisements which are getting shown on television, and naturally many a times this means that the customer or the target audience simply won't be able to pay attention to your advertising campaign, because there are so many companies and so many ads which are competing for the customer's attention, so the customer may not be able to attend to your advertising campaign. For example, you recall what you did yesterday, and when what all ads were shown when you were watching television yesterday. You would feel that you don't remember most of these ads. The reason is a lot of advertising clutter. Then again, there is fleeting exposure. What is the maximum duration of an ad that you can see on a TV, or that can be shown on a TV? It is maybe, it can vary from 10 seconds to 20 seconds, 30 seconds, but most of the time it cannot go beyond 1 minute. Generally does not go beyond 1 minute, right? The exceptions are the infomercials, television commercials, which can be from 3 minutes to 30 minutes long. So apart from those infomercials, otherwise the duration of the ad is maybe a few seconds to at most a minute, and that too when the marketer has sufficient resources available with him, because if you are showing a longer ad you will have to pay more. So naturally you would want to show a shorter ad, so which means the ad audience is going to get exposed to your ad only for maybe 5 seconds, 10 seconds, or 20 or 30 seconds. So that is what we mean by fleeting exposure, and this may not be sufficient for the audience to get convinced about the quality of your product and go on to buy your product. So that is an example of fleeting exposure. Again, the audience selectivity is also much less. If you look at Star TV, if you look at IPL, you would find there are people from different demographic backgrounds, different age profiles, different education watching this particular event, IPL, which means you cannot be selective as far as your advertising campaign on television is concerned. So for example, suppose you only want to show your ad to youngsters in the 18 to 25 age group, and suppose you decide that you would be showing your ad on Star TV. So yes, people in the 18 to 25 age group would be getting exposed to your ad, but so will be the people above 25 and below 18. So in that sense, the selectivity is much less. Then let's talk about the radio as a category of broadcast media. Again, mass use. In fact, radio is even more common than television, and the cost of advertising on radio is also less. One reason is you cannot make use of visuals in a radio ad, so naturally it is going to cost you much less. The ad space, if you want to buy on a radio or on a FM channel, you don't have to pay that much if you compare it with the amount of money that you are spending to show your ad on a television. Then again, the audience selectivity can be very very high. You know about the different FM channels, and you know that these FM channels, they have a particular range. You cannot listen to those FM channels across the country. They have a particular range. So for example, if you go to Delhi, you find that some FM channels which are actually operating there, they only have a range which does not stretch beyond Delhi NCR region, National Capital Region. So you cannot listen to that particular program here in Pithoragarh, which means in that sense geographical selectivity is there. So for example, if you want to broadcast an ad only for the Delhi audience because you are launching your product only in Delhi, naturally FM channels are going to be a good idea, because they are only going to be heard in the Delhi region and they cannot be heard beyond the Delhi region. So in that sense, use of radio gives you a lot of audience selectivity. But then what are the issues with radio as a media type? Only audio presentation, we have discussed this aspect. We cannot make use of visuals, so naturally it is going to be difficult for you to attract the attention of the audience, specifically when you compare it with a television. And then again, fleeting exposure, again there also the ad cannot be of a very long duration. They can be 1 minute, 1.5 minutes, that's all. They cannot be beyond that. So the exposure is again very fleeting. And this is one reason why, if you want to talk about some attributes of your product, and let's say your product is a very complicated one, very complex one, technologically complex one, and you want to talk about your attributes, it's always a good idea to go for a print ad rather than going for a broadcast media, right? Because therein you only have 10, 15, 25 or 30 seconds to make your points clear, to talk about your attributes and to convince the customers, the target audience, about the quality of a product, which is just not possible. On the other hand, if you have got your advertising campaign on the print media, the audience has got sufficient time. He can go through your ad at his own leisure, and that is why the exposure is going to be relatively more significant in case of print media. So whenever you are selling these kind of products, technologically very complicated products, or the products which are high involvement, then you generally go for print media. High involvement products, they require a lot of information search on the part of the customer. So the target audience is going to look for various information, they are going to decide between the various alternatives, and that is just not possible only on radio and television. They would definitely want to read about your attributes on magazine or maybe on a newspaper. So when you are going for high involvement products which require a lot of information before you actually decide to purchase them, it is always going to be better to use the print media. Then let us talk about telephones and mobiles. Herein there is a lot of scope to personalize the message. What do we mean by personalizing message? Have you been receiving some specific offers from the telecom operator that you are using? So let's say you are a subscriber of Airtel. Don't you get some special offers, and these special offers are only going to work on your number, they're not meant for everybody else. So this is an example of personalizing the message. And how are they able to do that? They are looking at your data consumption habits, data consumption pattern. They are looking at your phone call patterns, message patterns, and accordingly they are coming up with a customized offer for you. So that is an example of personalized messages which is possible on mobiles, because nowadays we have a lot of information about the customer. We can create the whole customer profile just by looking at his media habits and mobile habits, and then we can place relevant ads only to that particular customer using mobiles. So there's a lot of scope to personalize the messages as far as mobiles are concerned. However, the cost is going to be relatively high. The more personalization you would go for, the more customization you would go for, the costs would escalate. This is something that you have read in production operations management. Let's talk about snail mail and email. I have given you the difference in the last session. You should be clear about the difference. Now, again, you can be very selective, because now you can send personalized messages, customized messages to different people through their email IDs, right? And then there is a lot of flexibility. What do we mean by flexibility? So for example, suppose today at 8 o'clock I decide to launch a product, and by the time it is 9 o'clock I can send mails across to my target audience to let them know about the launch of this new product. So that kind of flexibility is there as far as email is concerned. And then you can make use of different formats for your email. You can make use of illustrations, you can make use of pictures, you can make use of different formats. You can send along photographs, you can send along the product catalogs. So there is a lot of flexibility when you use email, and there is less competition because most of the marketers are not using email as of now. And secondly, when the audience clicks on your email message, he is now going to attend fully to what you have said. He is going to attend fully to the message contained in that email. So in that sense, the moment when he is actually reading your mail, there is absolutely no competition. No other rival can attract his attention at that point of time, and that is why there is no competition at that particular point of time. So this is what we mean by this particular thing that we have discussed here. And then again, you can personalize the messages here. However, the costs are high. Naturally, you have to collect all the email IDs, and then you have to send across emails. So that actually is going to consume a lot of time. If you are using different email formats for different members in the target audience, naturally it's going to consume a lot of time. And then there are spam filters. Spam, I hope you know, you might be using Google Mail or maybe Yahoo or There are so many others, also Hotmail, and there is a spam filter there. Spam filter does what? It actually blocks these kind of messages from marketers, right? Until unless the owner of that email account permits these messages. So it simply blocks those messages. So it may so happen that you are sending across a mail and the spam filter recognize it as a marketer mail sent by a marketer or as a marketing pitch, and they would block it, and your audience, your target audience, would never be able to read that particular message because that has already gone to the spam filter, to the spam folder, right? So this can also happen. So what will happen basically is you are sending across mails but the audience is not going through those mails. So this can also happen. Now this is a weakness of this particular media type. So friends, I had promised that I would not be stretching the lecture beyond 20-25 minutes, so I am closing today, and in the next session we'll be discussing the remaining media types along with their advantages and limitations. Thank you very much for your time.